first official visit to China after she comes into the role of state counselor and the foreign minister after the new government was being formed. 5 days, that's quite long.
Yep.
The first country she visits besides those ASEAN countries.
Yep.
So what does all of these mean together, the significance of this trip?
Well, both symbolic and substantive. Symbolically, she wants to send a signal that the new government of Myanmar pay special attention, pay very great strategic importance to relationship with China. Although there have been some speculations or rumors about troubled bilateral relation, her first visit make a very clear signal. That's wrong. The true intention, true signal is the stability and the continuity of the development of the bilateral relation. By his visit, the trend will be strengthened.
Continuity, you're referring to very briefly, Mr. Yang,
Yep.
before she came into office, during the junta time?
Yes, clearly, both Myanmar and China want to maintain the stability based on the long course of the bilateral relationship, based on the long course of the policies from both sides. So that relates to the continuity, say, for both China or Myanmar side, they need to continue the previous policies.
Ms. Clapp, what about that? Is that possible, particularly at the time when you see if Ms. Suu Kyi wants to do that? She really needs to exercise a high degree of pragmatism in the diplomacy.
Yes, I think we will see a high degree of pragmatism. But she is, during the years of military governance, particularly the last 10 years, foreign relations with the great powers, Myanmar's foreign relations with the great powers became skewed because of Western dissatisfaction with the military government. And I think Aung San Suu Kyi's main mission is to rebalance the country's relations with great powers so that they have equal weight. So there will be equal weight between China and the West and Russia and Japan and all the other powers, centers of power in the world. And I think that means continuity for its relations with China. It is not discontinuity, but it means a rebalancing of Myanmar's relations with the rest of the world. And we will see that playing out very soon, because she's going from China to the United States, to the UN, to Canada, and so forth.
Yeah, we'll see how it's going to unveil her thoughts on the country's diplomacy. Having said that, though, Mr. Lim, coming from Singapore, of course, one of the important points of diplomacy for Ms. Suu Kyi is also Myanmar's relations with the ASEAN countries. Some were suggesting Myanmar could be a game changer. Others were saying, well, may not necessarily be. What is your opinion, given her first trip to China already?
Yes, this is a very significant visit, because it has been mentioned in the international media that this is a visit to a major power. And the previous guest has also mentioned this is also a visit that commensurates with the Myanmarese government's attempt to be able to be friendly to all major powers in the world. And before visiting China, Ms. Aung San Suu Kyi has also visited Southeast Asian countries like Thailand. So this is really a sort of attempt to reach out to the important neighbors of Myanmar, and also to reach out to the major powers in the region. And China is one of these important neighboring major powers to Myanmar.
Yes, indeed. We have been talking about this trip for quite some time, because since our last trip to China, which was before the election, it was in the month of June, right before, 5 months before the November election. She came over here and certainly had some good discussions with the Chinese leaders. Eventually, her party won the election and she became the state councilor. But this time, of course, she's coming in with much bigger capacity.
Yep.
She is thinking about streamlining the whole national policy, whether it's diplomacy or economic development. Mr. Yang, 2 points. One, it seems that Mr. Suu Kyi is going to ask help and support from China about domestic peace process.
Yep.
Secondly, she's also likely to discuss with China about the future of her grand economic plan, even though some argue it is quite bland. Whether grand or bland, that certainly needs some kinds of investment coming from all over the region. Mr. Yang, how much do you think she will be satisfied, quote unquote, this time?
Well, actually, you are touching on both of the fundamental challenges facing the new government. And she really wants to get help from China on both of the issues. But compared with the peaceful process, China can play bigger roles in the economic front rather than the peace process.
Let's talk about peace process if it is difficult.
Yeah.
So let's put on the difficult point first. There has been a lot of talk about China's possible influence on one of those armed ethnic groups directed by the ethnic Chinese called Kang, but it's only ethnic Chinese. It's someone in Myanmar. And suggesting the border issue could also be one between China and Myanmar. How much China would have a say on this issue given its domestic affairs of Myanmar? And also, we saw the 21st century so-called Pangdong meeting is coming over at the end of this month. How much can be achieved during Mr. Suu Kyi's visit?
To some degree, China is in dilemma. That's why I said it's a very difficult issue for China.
What
because
do you mean dilemma?
China has insisted on the long time is on non-provisional principle. So basically, the peace process in Myanmar is a domestic issue in Myanmar. However, it really relates to a lot of ethnic Chinese in Myanmar. So we are in a dilemma. However, China can play a positive role as a facilitator or informal mediator among groups. But I think that is most. I think the keys lies in the confrontational groups rather than lies in the China. What China can do is just create a peaceful environment, create a good political atmosphere to facilitate for talks. So we don't intervene. We don't want to intervene the internal affairs. However, we will strongly oppose any efforts for military solution.
All right.
So that's, I think, China's position.
Ms. Clapp, it is no secret that China has been very vocal about supporting the peace process going on in Myanmar over the past few months. Also, Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi, last time during his visit there, he said it very clearly once and again. Having said that, though, how much do you think Ms. Suu Kyi this time as State Councilor will be able to help Myanmar bringing on a peace process among all its ethnic groups? Once again, we look at the calendar. August the 31st, that will be the so-called the 21st century Panglong meeting, which is supposed to be all the armed ethnic groups in Myanmar come together. Will that be solved during this part of her China trip?
No, the peace process is going to be a very, very long process. And the Panglong Conference later this month will just be the beginning of a new phase in that conference, in that process. The last government, the Thein Sein government, concentrated on the ceasefire agreement. With Panglong, we're going to see the process move into a much wider group, including not only the armed groups, including the Tatmadaw, the National Army, and the ethnic armed groups, but also political leaders, and there'll be some civil society there. It will be a very large conference, and it will begin to deal with some fundamental political and other issues that have been plaguing relations between the ethnic groups and the majority. I think China plays a very important role here, because several of the major armed groups are right there on the border and relate to China very directly, because there are similar groups in China. And China has very strong influence on these groups. And so the fact that the Hua and the Mollah and so forth have agreed to go to Panglong is really a plus for China. China will get credit for having encouraged them in that direction. And I think she'll probably be grateful for that.
All right, Mr. Yang, I want to come back to you very briefly from you as well. We have seen some issues between China and Myanmar. For example, a few months ago, one Myanmar airplane from the Air Force mistakenly bombed a sugar field over the border of China, and of course killed several individuals over there. But certainly that was a mistake, and the two sides have already come to an agreement in a way about the nature of it. And you also see that the Myanmar government has come to realize that the interactions between the Chinese side and those from the Myanmar side, when it comes to the ethnic groups, are mainly individual interactions rather than governmental and over-border approaches. So what do you make of these mixed signals and events between China and Myanmar, considering security, considering domestic peace process?
Well, it's a really mixed challenges. On one hand, China has to help Myanmar to solve the military confrontations between the local forces and the governments. But on the other hand, China really have serious concerns about the security, both for our own and the ethnic Chinese over there.
Yeah.
That's why I said we strongly oppose any kind of a military solution. We will try every effort to facilitate all the groups to get together through the peaceful process.
And certainly it is not just politics, it is also economy. As we say, that one of the most important things on Ms. Suu Kyi's agenda, one of Ms. Suu Kyi's focus of the visit is bilateral trade between China and Myanmar. China, the largest source of foreign investment for Myanmar over the years. Up to July this year, Chinese investment in Myanmar has reached beyond the $25 billion US, taking up about 40% of the total foreign investment in the country. China is also the largest trading partner of Myanmar, making up 1/3 of Myanmar's total trade volume. And those are just some of the numbers when it comes to trade and economic development between the two countries. The question is, Ms. Clapp, before I go to Mr. Lim, let me ask you once again, how much will Ms. Suu Kyi be able to achieve her goals of having more Chinese investment in Myanmar? We still got some issues about the copper mines. We still got some issues about the dam project.
Yes, there are many issues, but there are many issues because China is such a big investor in Myanmar. There's no question that there is a future, for a large future for Chinese investment in Myanmar. The challenge for China is going to be to make that investment work for the people of Myanmar and not just for China. Right now, the perception in Myanmar among the people is that Chinese investment is for China's benefit and not their benefit. So China's challenge is going to be working with Aung San Suu Kyi's government to make sure that their projects meet the needs of the people.
All right. Mr. Lim, what do you make of it? Because when you look at the ASEAN economies, including that of Myanmar, bilateral trade has been a very active factor in the relations. But still, it's not necessarily going to mean everything is going to be peaceful and wonderful. There are always issues that have to be worked on. And Mr. Lim, what do you make of it, the possibilities?
There appears to be 3 items on the agenda. The first item is the Asian Development Bank has identified the need for US $60 billion worth of loans and aids that's needed to modernize Myanmar's electricity supply. And so China can possibly play a role in this. Second item that is mentioned is the fact about infrastructure, particularly transportation infrastructure. And China also can play a role in this, particularly since China is pushing the One Belt, One Road and the AIIB infrastructure bank. And so these two avenues offer possibilities for both China and Myanmar to talk and come to a certain win-win situation based on their national needs and priorities. So they need, this would be a very good opportunity for the two leaders to come together to talk. And as the previous guest has mentioned, when the talk goes on, it is important for both sides to assess how China can help the local communities that are situated along these highway routes, as well as the third item, which is hydropower dam project, how China can help and benefit the local communities, and how the Myanmarese government can maximize benefits for local communities based on their priorities.
Right.
So it is, as you have mentioned earlier on, China is a major trader and an investor, and therefore there's a much potential for possibilities for cooperation.
Mr. Yang, having said that though, China and Myanmar both have realized, and they said it openly as well to the international community, that the deals have to be mutually beneficial and it has to be win-win. That's the basic line of doing trade anyway. So on the one hand, China could contribute. On the other hand, how is the Chinese government going to guarantee the rights and also the social responsibilities of enterprises, of the business community?
Yeah. I think it's a really big questions for Chinese investors and Chinese enterprises because of past several failed cases or bad stories. So I think by this summit or visit, the top-level visit, both sides will touch on this very concrete issue because that is issue relating to the investors' confidence,
that's right.
The status of the commercial activities.
These
in
have
Myanmar.
become samples
yeah.
as to which direction the bilateral trade cooperation is going.
Yeah, so that's not an issue relating to individual projects. It's an issue of the total environment, total atmosphere, total conditions for business, for doing business in Myanmar. And the Myanmar government really desperately need the foreign investors and the foreign commercials flood in. But without a solution or good solution to the confidence, to the atmosphere, they cannot achieve what they want.
One of the things, Mr. Yang, I really want you to shed some light very briefly on this. Politics in Myanmar has changed from before the election to after the election.
Yeah.
And of course, Ms. Suu Kyi and her party goal, it has also switched from winning in the election to governing a country and making sure there's plan, there's also ways to implement the plans for the country's future. So how much will that, in a way, impact on the ways of thinking when it comes to business with China? And how much of that will, in a way, make the two countries thinking about the fundamentals when it comes to economic and trade development?
For China's perspective, ideally, the changes is inevitable in Myanmar, but the changes should be focused in their political structure. But the economic atmosphere, the business atmosphere should be maintained, even improved. That's what we hope. And through the political reforms and economic reconstruction, I think the environment for investment will be better.
We'll see. And before we go, I want one sentence from the other two panelists each. What is your expectations for this trip, and how is that likely to impact your country's relations with Myanmar? Ms. Clapp, shall we go with you first, very briefly?
Okay, I think this will be a very important visit because it will be her first visit where she is responsible basically for the government. So it will be the beginning of the relationship between Myanmar and China for this administration in Myanmar. As far as the U.S. is concerned, we certainly expect her to be visiting China before she makes visits elsewhere in the world because China is her largest neighbor.
All right, I see.
And it's perfectly fine with the United States.
Mr. Lim, what do you think? Briefly from you.
This visit is very important because it can set the tone for lower level visits by bureaucrats and politicians on both sides. It can also set the overall tone for the bilateral relations for decades to come. And many in ASEAN countries are expecting or have certain hopes that relationships can be stable and peaceful, and that cooperative trade deals as well as infrastructure building can persist and sustain.